Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again. And today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, taking a look at tonight's new card, Alioth. Alioth is a 6-cost 5-power that reads, on reveal, destroy all enemy cards played here this turn, including unrevealed cards. Now, if you've been keeping up with the overview of the September spotlights, I personally think this is the best value week in terms of just good playable cards being in the spotlight caches. I'm not super optimistic that Alioth is going to be a very impactful card immediately, but I do think it will probably be good over time as balance changes in the game a bit. Basically, short version, in a meta that is infested with Loki decks all over the place, coming in at like some ridiculous 30% play rate or something like that. You really don't want an Alioth in your deck because the Loki decks often maintain priority and they take your cards on turn 4 or turn 5, and well, getting to play against a 4 or 5 cost Alioth seems like it is probably going to be a pretty bad time, especially if you are revealing your cards second. So I'm not overly optimistic that this is a card you need to get right away. However, given that Snowguard and Hitmonkey are in here, I think if you want to get those cards too, this is generally a pretty good spotlight week to go for, even if I don't expect Alioth to be the most impactful card relative to the current metagame. So let's take a look at some day 1 decks here for this card. I think this is mainly going to be like a Galactus style kind of card. That's probably the archetype that really likes this effect the most. However, there are some other places it might see a bit of play, so let's take a look at the day 1 decks. So first up, we're going to be taking a look at some Galactus decks. This is the first one I threw together that I think is pretty bare bones in terms of its overall strategy, but it's definitely one that I think Alioth adds a lot to. So the idea with this deck is we are mainly a Galactus deck, but we do have another path to victory here with our big Nimrod. So the idea is trying to make a big Nimrod with Shuri, so go Shuri into Nimrod, and then we have a few different options about how we can close out the game. We can get the Galactus to go off to get multiple Nimrods. We can eat our Nimrod with Venom and Carnage and blow it up with the Destroyer. Just a variety of ways to win the game through that kind of combination of cards. We're running Ramp here not only to get Galactus out ahead of turn 6, but also to cheat out some of our powerful 5 or 6 cost cards earlier on in the game. So Electro and Wave are acting as our main ramp pieces. Daredevils here is a bit of insurance just to help us guarantee we're playing cards where we need to on turn 5, especially if we're trying to get that Galactus off. It's especially helpful, but it's even good with things like Hobgoblin or Dr. Octopus. Other than that, I think it's a pretty straightforward list. Really what Alioth is adding here is the fact that Galactus, I think post-rework or post-change, has had an issue where, well, if Galactus goes off, you're often taking priority, and then you often can just lose to a Shang-Chi. And so in that instance, Alioth ends up being a lot better than things like Death or Null, because if we have priority, we're just going to blow up our opponent's cards before they get to do anything, and it'll just end the game. So I think that's actually quite a big upgrade compared to having to run just a really big thing to close out the game that is often vulnerable to one of the most common tech cards. Then we have a bit of a different take on a Galactus Ramp style list. So similar core here, same ramp pieces and Electro and Wave, some other similar overlaps here with things like Hobgoblin and Galactus obviously. But I think the paths to victory here are a little bit different, and I think this really leverages the potential of Alioth in that it's going to be hard to play around everything that your opponent is going to be expecting from you. I think this will be better in like a conquest setting where you get them with Galactus one game, so then they start trying to play around Galactus, but then their play around Galactus ends up losing to Alioth or ends up losing to Orca. I think it's a pretty interesting idea where you just have a variety of different ways to close out the game, so your opponent can never really feel overly confident in playing around one specific thing. Because this deck can win without having to rely on Galactus necessarily, but if your opponent doesn't respect it, it's just another alternate way to win the game. Our early game here consisting of Nebula, who has some nice synergy with Professor X. X is great in a deck like this. I think anytime you're cheating out Professor X on turn 4, you're generally pretty happy, and Electro enables us to do that pretty effectively. If we can close down a lane with Professor X, then we can use our other cards like Alioth and Odin to just guarantee another lane by getting that Alioth down on 5, copying it with Odin. Should be pretty hard for the opponent to win a lane. We could try and use the Orca as well. A lot of people don't expect that much power coming into play out of nowhere. We can do a little bit of disruption with the Hobgoblin, and we have Death here just as another way to close out the game post Galactus. And then our last Galactus deck of the bunch is going to be a Thanos Galatis. Now, I'm not overly optimistic about this deck. I think the nerf to Thanos hit it supremely hard. I think losing that draw has made Thanos decks significantly worse, especially in ones that are trying to do combo-y type of things like this one is with Galactus. The fact that you're seeing one less card a lot of the time is a really, really big nerf. I'm going to try it out anyway, but it's definitely the one I'm the least optimistic of the bunch. However, we still do good Thanos destroy things here, running up the main destroy cards. Don't have enough space for Deathlock here, but I don't think you necessarily need it. We have enough destroy with Carnage, Killmonger, and Venom. X-23 is nice, as is Psylocke, as more ways to ramp outside the Time Stone. Really just trying to get that Professor X scam on turn 4 as often as we can, or just make sure we have a way of ramping into Galactus before turn 6 ends up coming along. We have multiple payoffs here for the destroy effects, as well as if we do get the Galactus to go off with Null, Alioth, and Death. So if that does go off, we should have a pretty reliable way to close out the game, and those cards can generally still be good in games where Galactus isn't as viable of an opportunity. This deck also has the potential of just kind of doing the turn 6 Galactus thing, because if the opponent is just kind of giving up on one lane or they're expecting you to Alioth it, you can still get a bunch of power there with Galactus and maybe your X-23 and Wolverine blowing up a few times and being resurrected. Then we have a bit more of a traditional ramp list. I'm not the highest on Sandman Ramp right now, but if you want to play Alioth in a ramp-focused deck that's not trying to do Galactus things, this is probably the way I'd go about doing it. I think Sand Ramp has a bit of a tough time right now with all the Loki going around. Obviously, limiting your opponent to only playing one card a turn is good, and I think Wave and Sandman are good against Loki because of that, but the issue is this deck just doesn't have the tools to get ahead in the early game compared to those decks. And so if you're not ahead, even if you're limiting them to one card, when they get their Loki off, they're going to have access to the same powerful 5 and 6 cost cards we do, and generally that means they're able to stay ahead to close out the game. So I'm not overly optimistic about the Ramp Sandman deck doing super well, but I think it's worth a try if you want to explore that kind of ramp side of Alioth without doing the Galactus thing. Maybe it's alright, we'll see. It does run some, powerful combo stuff. Zola gets a lot of value here because not only is it good with like the Black Panther combo, but you can also use like Zola on Alioth or Zola on Dr. Doom. Pretty decent. Arrow's pretty good when we're limiting your opponent to one card. Odin rebuys our powerful effects. Chavez just really here for that nice consistency because this deck has a pretty high curve, so you really want to be able to be finding your early game and ramp pieces when you need them in the first 3 turns. Last but not least, we have the Move deck, Wave Move, making room for Alioth here, as well as Jean Grey. This is actually a version of the deck I wanted to experiment with last meta, but didn't really have time to. I was really big on the Wave Move deck with Arrow, big fan of this deck, did really well for me. Ended up taking down the Infinity Conquest for me last month, so pretty happy with it. Some people were messing around with the Jean version, as Jean seemed pretty good with this style of deck. We have ways of filling up the Jean lane with things like Nightcrawler and Jeff that we can move away later. And we're just trying to limit the opponent to one card on the final turn with Wave. And we have Arrow, Doom, and now Alioth is 3 different ways to close out the game after Wave is limiting our opponent to only playing one card. I'm not sure if Alioth is going to do the job here. Previously, we had Magneto as one of our main finishers here, but I think Magneto got a bit worse in the context of the newly evolving meta. There don't seem to be as many Zabu decks or 4-drops around when everyone's playing Loki stuff, so I think it's worth trying out Alioth, and Doom's nice as a go-wide thing. The only thing I will say is do be a little careful if you are playing this deck when you do go into the Wave turn, because if they have Loki'd, they can use your powerful endgame cards against you, like Arrow, Doom, and Alioth, so you do want to keep that in mind if you're playing against Loki decks, but generally I think the idea here is cool. I think forcing the opponent into one lane with Jean is a pretty solid thing when we have ways of moving our stuff around the board. It also adds a lot of value to our Nebula, as some decks are going to have a really hard time respecting the Gene lane and playing a card into it while also being able to respect our Nebula being in another different lane. So yeah, if you liked the move deck and you're looking for something a little bit different to try out with it now, this is one I'm pretty interested to see how it performs with Alioth. And there we have it. That's going to wrap it up for our day 1 Alioth decks. As always, links in the description if you want to grab any of these decks for yourself. I'm curious, what do you think about this card? Are you going to be picking up for it? Are you going for this week for some of the other cards like the newly buffed Snow Guard and Hit Monkey? I know I was initially going to skip all the September caches and just go for tokens, but given Alioth is the only 6k card, and I actually like the variants available for this week aside from it, probably going to use some spotlights for this one and save those 6k tokens for maybe October or December, when I don't really plan to be engaging with the spotlight caches as much. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.